Now, according to Onajite Okoloko, the CEO of Notore Chemical Industries, Nigeria's small-scale farmers have suffered for far too long in the face of a poorly funded and inefficiently executed distribution chain that has failed to provide them with fertilizer products that they need to raise their productivity. He joins me to discuss the potential of Nigeria's fertilizer industry and, of course, the factors that may be holding it back. Onajite, thank you so much. Pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you very much.
So quite interesting the way Nigeria's fertilizer industry is evolving. And now from a production point of view, we're seeing significant ramping up across the major players in the market. But help us understand how the market has changed, has evolved, say, in the last 5 years and where we are today.
Yeah, first of all, it's a pleasure to be on the show. The Nigerian fertilizer industry is evolving. It's evolving because there's additional capacity of production in the country, urea in particular. There's an awareness by the country that agriculture is the way forward. A nation that can't feed itself is incapable of actually really growing. Nigeria should actually be a net exporter of food because the sub-Saharan Africa is actually the new food basket or could actually feed the world. Nigeria is very critical in that aspect, especially being that we have close to 200 million people, and population will continue to grow over the time. I mean, there's statistics to show that the population should reach about 350 million people in another 20 to 25 years. So the most important thing is where we're going to feed, how we're going to feed ourselves. Fertilizer inputs become very critical. In other words, farmers have to now be able to improve their yields significantly, farming on the same amount of property they have available to them. So what's happened over the years is that Notore first started by, should I say, revamping an old fertilizer plant which it acquired from the federal government in 2005. And over the years have significantly rehabilitated that plant and is producing 500,000 tons today. We now have Indorama, which came back in and started producing fertilizers, I would say last year, or the end of 2015. Prior to that, Notore was the only urea fertilizer plant in sub-Saharan Africa. So of course our capacity is increasing, which means that we actually have more fertilizers available. And then when you then take into consideration a government that is now very serious about agriculture and the use of fertilizers, then we can actually begin to see significant progress.
I mean, good to hear, but let's talk about the value chain.
Yes.
You've talked about the fact that there are still inherent challenges, especially at the last mile, the farmers who need to use these the fertilizer. Help us understand the value chain as it is right now and those inefficiencies or challenges that are still there.
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing we need is not just availability of fertilizers, but how do you get fertilizers to the farmers in the most critical parts of the country. Farming doesn't really take place in the urban areas. It actually takes place in the rural areas. So that's where the farms are. That's where the farming communities are. That's where the cultural belt is, especially in the north. Notore, in particular, has built significant, strong channels into the market, reaching the farmers at the doorstep, at the farm gates, and being able to deliver fertilizers to them on time. It's still just generally across the country. The distribution channels are still not as strong as I would say Notore is, but it's beginning to, other companies are beginning to increase and improve the distribution channels to the market. What's more important for farmers is to have fertilizers at the right time, have accessibility to the farmers, to fertilizers and good quality fertilizers. We've had broken channels all this time. But I would say that in the last 5 years, especially since Notore came into the market, using a distribution network that has dealers, what we call our village promoters. Our village promoters are basically cultural extension services workers, private sector extension services workers, which we're the ones that that's a private sector driven initiative for the first time.
If I could just quickly comment here, because I remember the agriculture minister that we had before now, Mr. Akiwumi Adesina, I know he came into the space and dramatically changed the fertilizer story. And I knew that, if I can remember correctly, there was something about cell phone, cell phones for the farmers to enable them get fertilizers on demand? I'm just thinking, wasn't that...
Yeah, that was an electronic subsidy system that the government had put in at that time, where they could get subsidies to the farmers using the phones, and then they have access to subsidies to be able to buy fertilizers. But that system worked at that time, but what's the most important thing is you actually want farmers to move away from a subsidized structure and teach farmers how to commercially, to have commercial mindsets in such a way that they know that if they use the right inputs, which is fertilizers and seed, they can actually have increased yields. And that is what Notore has taken as an initiative to do over the years by training farmers how to use fertilizers efficiently and effectively to improve yields. And we have over the years seen significant yields of farmers increase over time.
Yeah, so would you say that is one, when it comes to solutions, was that one solution that has worked? Because if we're trying to fix, looking at across the value chain and trying to fix that, obviously we need to put solutions on the table. So is that one, apart from that, is that like a significant solution, or are there others that perhaps we haven't explored yet and should be at this time?
Well, at the time, that was a time when the federal government of Nigeria was providing a subsidy into the market. So the question was, how do you get the subsidies directly in the hands of farmers and not in the hands of middlemen who strip the subsidies? So under Additional's time, when he was Minister of Agriculture, there was a government initiative to provide subsidies to the farmers. And that was the most efficient way of providing subsidies to the farmers at that time. Today, we found out that farmers really don't need subsidies. Okay, you need to just make sure that farmers get fertilizers at affordable prices and have fertilizers at the right time. And the right time is before the planting season. And the right type of fertilizer applications should be available in the market at that time.
Okay, so my question is, is that happening now?
Oh, absolutely, it is happening, definitely.
Okay, so we have solved that
problem? We have solved that in the sense that under the current federal government's fertilizer initiative, fertilizers are being made available at the right time without a subsidy. Let me re-emphasize that point, without a subsidy. It is just being able to make sure that the fertilizers reflect the true prices as they come into the market, and farmers have access to the fertilizers when they require it and at the right quality and type of fertilizers.
Okay, let's talk about funding or investments in this sector. I know that there are three major players. Notore is one of them, and I know that across the board there is that, ongoing plans to ramp up production, to ramp up capacity, as it were, across the sector. Help us understand, from your perspective in terms of funding, investments. Are you making more? What kind of investments are you making right now? Are there plans to expand this year? Do you have what is your short, medium, or long-term plan for Nigeria and perhaps even the African continent?
The Notore strategy is very simple. We've identified Nigeria is actually, or Africa as a whole, is actually an NPK fertilizer market, which is your blend of nitrogen, phosphate, and potash. Okay, so our focus this year and going forward is to make sure that we have available NPK fertilizers in the market, the right type of fertilizers or NPK fertilizers for specific crop types and specific soil types. The biggest challenge we've always had is we've always had a situation where one fertilizer appears to fit all, and that definitely destroys, or should I say, does not improve the yields in the manner in which it's supposed to happen. So now Notore's focus is making specific fertilizer blends for specific crops, putting into the market a cassava blend for fertilizers, or should I say an NPK blend for cassava, an NPK blend for cocoa, and of course your usual NPK blends for your tubers, your NPK blend for your cereals. So different plants, so different crops require specific types of fertilizers. And it's not just one cap fits all. And that's the problem we've had in the past.
But do farmers know this? The end users, do they know that
we're educating farmers today.
Because I didn't even know that.
Yes, we're educating farmers today. And farmers are becoming more aware of what kind of fertilizers they require at any particular point in time for specific crop types and specific soil types. There's some deficiency in the soils for certain types of minerals that should be there. So that's where you have the difference between your usual macronutrients and then introducing micronutrients into it to actually fix the soil and make sure that the crop has the right types of fertilizers. So this is the second phase of the fertilizer market we're looking at. It's not just making sure you have general fertilizers in the market, but now tailor-making fertilizers for specific crop types so that the yields can actually be seen by the farmers. And when the farmers see an increase in yields, then it actually attracts the farmers in buying and purchasing more fertilizers. And let's not also forget that you can use fertilizers all you want, but you also have to use improved seed that respond positively to the application of fertilizers. That is how you get the miracle yields that we all talk about.
I mean, that would suggest a lot of time, money into research and development. I was going to talk also about how innovation is also changing the space, because, like, I mean, you've made it obvious now that it's not just one size fits all, as it were, and can be tailor-made for each crop. So help us understand, from your perspective, how you're investing in innovation, research and development to help you to begin to not just add more value to the fertilizer itself.
Okay, first of all, Notore as an organization has a seed department. Okay, we introduced or we commercialized some hybrid seed over the last few years to go into the market. And we carry those seed along with our fertilizers through our channels to the farmers. Because we tell the farmers, for you to actually have the kind of miracle yields we expect that will allow us feed the nation and also become an ultimate exporter of certain types of crop, you have to use your fertilizers, you have to use your seed, and we also have to train the farmers. So Notore on his own has about over 3,000 demonstration farms across the country, where on less than 1/8 of a hectare of land, split into two, in the heart of the farming communities. The farmers use their traditional practice on their own plots, and on this particular small demonstration plot, we actually use the Notore best practice. And the farmers can actually see the yields and compare the yields. And they see that they're probably getting 10 bags of maize per hectare on their traditional practice, and on Notore's demonstration farm, right in the heart of the farming community, they're getting 100 bags of maize. And it only takes the equivalent of 6 bags of maize of input costs to go from 10 bags of maize to 100 bags of maize. And then the farmers then realize, we don't really need fertilizers. We don't really need subsidies. That what they actually need is having the fertilizers available at the right time, in the right quality, and the right kind of fertilizer for that particular type of crop.
But you brought, specialized seeds. So yes. I'm thinking, would it not work? Would they have lower yields if they use the right kind of fertilizer, but with their own kind of seeds? Because if you bring like a hybrid kind of seeds, and you say that it works best with that certain fertilizer to get the jumbo yields, I'm thinking there is a difference. Does that mean that the farmers have to purchase seeds? They're better off purchasing seeds from you?
Absolutely.
What if they can't?
Absolutely. We introduced the maize and the rice seed a few years ago, and then we're actually going to spend more capital now in actually expanding that, really in making sure that we have rice and maize in the market. We'll start from that. But here's the point. The farmers today use farm-safe seed. They actually look at the farm and say, okay, you know what? Our yields were better on this small piece of property here. So let us save some of that seed and use it for next year. That's the traditional practice that they use. But if we can get farmers to use hybrid seed that respond positively to the application of fertilizer, and at the same time is more resistant to crop diseases and all of that, you would see that yields will significantly improve.
Okay, Onajite, we need to take a short break. I thank you for your time so far. I've been speaking to Onajite Okoloko, CEO of Notore. Still with me in the studio is Onajite Okoloko, the CEO of Notore Chemical Industries, and we're looking at Nigeria's fertilizer market. Onajite, thank you for your time so far.
Thank you.
Let's continue with your investments. I know that you also have investments planned to ramp up capacity for this year. Tell us about that.
Yes, our intention right now, right now we have a plant that's producing 500,000 tons of fertilizers per annum. We intend to build a second plant, but before we do that, we're running concurrently. The plan is to debottleneck the existing plant to increase design capacity by 50%. That would take us to 750,000 metric tons per annum. And we intend to build a brand new plant producing 1 million tons of urea. Now we have the raw materials available for that through a related company. We have all the gas we require, and that was the challenge before, was having the natural gas that you require to actually produce a fertilizer. So we do have the natural gas available, and we're moving very quickly to build a new plant that will produce about 1 million tons of urea. So combined, we should have 1.75 million tons of urea over the next 4 to 5 years. We're also looking at a granular NPK plant as well too, using natural gas to produce ammonia, and then from there you would then produce granular NPK, which will eliminate the requirement for blending NPKs to some certain degree, because it's also important that the blending plants continue to work in Nigeria.
So what does this do for your market share? I knew that, this space is becoming a little competitive, especially when you think about another big player that's coming on stream that's meant to be the biggest in Africa, perhaps even for the world. So I'm just thinking, what does that mean for you in terms of market share?
Well, the way you have to look at fertilizers and the utilization, first of all, is that in Nigeria, which is similar to the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, we're using the average farmer farming on this average small-scale farmer, or should I say the utilization of fertilizers in the industry today, is somewhere between 10 to 13 kilograms per hectare. This is far below world standards. The recommended utilization of fertilizers is about 200 kilograms per hectare. So if you look at that, Nigeria today is using about less than 1.5 million tons of compound fertilizers on an annualized basis. We should be using at least 10 million tons of fertilizers in this country. If you compare Nigeria to other nations like Pakistan that have about the same land mass, but even Nigeria has 3 times more arable land than Pakistan does have.
Okay.
And we have similar population sizes. Farming structures are identical. Smallholder scale farmers farming on 1 to 2 hectares of land. Pakistan is using close to 10 million tons. So there is significant, should I say there is major, or there's latent demand.
So the market is still on the supply, because if you think of, take your own company, Notore Chemicals, you take Indorama, which is producing about 1.4, and you combine that with the Dangote fertilizer plant, that brings it to around 7.2 million metric tons. And I thought that would translate to oversupply of the market, and perhaps we could begin to export it. So you're saying that we're still, wouldn't even meet local demand?
We wouldn't even meet local demand when farmers are operating at the best practice levels. Oh. And that's what Notore does. Notore is training farmers so that they can use more fertilizers. We're seeing farmers begin to use more fertilizers. And when we can move the average from 10 kilograms per hectare to 100 to 150 kilograms per hectare, which is very doable because it actually happened in Southeast Asia. Sub-Saharan Africa had the same profile with Southeast Asia prior to the 70s. They had the same fertilizer utilization profile. They had the same crop yield profiles until, of course, Norman Borlaug, who is known as the father of the Asian Green Revolution, introduced fertilizers and seed as a means of improving yields. And that's where you had the inflection point, and then Southeast Asia moved far away from Africa. We can do that here. But again, let me go back to the fact that Notore is not just has a Nigerian strategic plan. Notore's plan is to ensure that we can make fertilizers available, first of all, in Nigeria and then across West and Central Africa. Because these areas as well also need as much fertilizers as we require. Okay, so
what is the strategic plan in place to expand? What is it? Do you have a time frame for when you begin to move across the continent?
We've already started the program right now.
So where is it?
We just signed a major agreement with Urakali, one of the largest producers of potash in the world. And that plan is to set up fertilizer blending plants across West Africa. And at the same time also, probably in the future, build an ammonia NPK plant, okay, and which will focus mainly on ensuring that fertilizers are available not just in Nigeria but across Central and West Africa.
No, but that's interesting also because we have another major player who has those same plans to build a plant that's not only the biggest in Africa but the biggest in the world. So I'm just thinking, what then becomes of the space if we get to a point where we're actually able to meet local demand first, and then we have enough to actually go around the entire
then the rest of the world is the market.
Entire continent.
Understand, the rest of the world becomes the market because, again...
There are also big players on the global front. And incidentally, in March, the 500 global fertilizer leaders are going to gather in Marrakesh, and they're going to be talking about the market. They're going to be talking about how innovation and tech is changing the space. And I get the sense that, I mean, at that level, it's quite, fiercely competitive, and you really have to, come with a lot of muscle and capacity. I'm just thinking.
But this is where the Nigerian producers will have a major advantage. First of all, we have relatively inexpensive gas, and gas is 90% of the raw materials you need for making a product like urea. All right, we're flaring gas today, so again, being able to convert what we're flaring into a product that can actually help agriculture globally is a very significant milestone that we have here. Nigeria is going to be very competitive from, one, the gas prices in Nigeria, which is cheaper, or should I say less expensive than other international markets. That's one point. Secondly, from a logistics standpoint, Nigeria has access to South America. Brazil, for instance, uses 34 million tons of fertilizers per annum, or even more. They import, actually, that has something as significant as that. So Brazil is a big fertilizer market when you look at just one country. Nigeria has a strategic advantage being 10 days sailing from Brazil. So you got the South American market, you got the US market, you got Europe. So what we need to do is satisfy the requirements for Nigeria, satisfy the requirements for Africa, and then become competitive when it comes to exports into international markets. It will help us as well in Nigeria begin to earn foreign exchange, which also begins to help stabilize the country. Okay,
to bring you back to that point again, what would you say, for Notore, what is your edge in the market?
I'm sorry?
What is your edge in the market, compared to other players?
Our edge today in the market is our channels were built into the market, which is very critical. Today, if you go into the market and you look for a bag of fertilizers, we have a nickname that the local farmers call the Notore fertilizers. They call it khaki soldier. That is the fertilizer that wears the military uniform. So when the local farmer sends his little son into the market to go buy fertilizers, he says, buy Notore fertilizers. And why are we buying Notore fertilizers? Because of the quality of the fertilizers, the packaging, the availability, the support system that Notore actually provides to the farmers in terms of training, seed, and again in the future, we'll begin to work with farmers to guarantee offtake, because there's a critical part of it that you have to look at. And you've got to be innovative as you do your business strategies, because in the future, we're going to have these explosive yields. And when we have these explosive yields, what's going to happen to the crop? Because our channels, should I say the value chain, the agricultural value chain is broken in sub-Saharan Africa, which means that we still have some of the highest post-harvest losses in the world. 50% of what the farmer produces today, albeit that he's producing subsistent quantities of food, 50% is lost. So we got to actually, at the end of the day, find a way to channel his output into the market to continue to give the farmers the appetite, to continue to grow food and use fertilizers. So it is being able to provide and support the farmer across the entire value chain. That is Notore's objective.
Would you say that you've seen enough for a lot of innovation or tech changing the space here in the... I know that you're doing a lot in that department, but would you see, when you look outside from your factory, do you see enough innovation going on?
Oh, absolutely. I could tell you one thing for a fact that we have seen. The recognition of farmers as to the type of fertilizers to be used. And again, you can't underscore the fact that we are seeing in our own program, working directly with farmers, we're seeing yields go up substantially.
Okay, Onajite, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on the show today. And a happy birthday. I forgot to tell you that. Happy birthday, and we wish you all the best. Thank you for being here today. I've been speaking to Onajite Okoloko, CEO of Notore Chemical Industry.